Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Carlson. I'm Chief Exec of Canterbury's Business Improvement District, and I'm hosting this session today with my colleague Rachel Pillard, who's our Head of Marketing and Communications. Rachel also runs our training programme throughout the year. And we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Canterbury City Council's Heritage and Design Manager, Lizzy Johnson, who's going to present the session today on Shopfront Guidelines Explained. So over the last few years, the City Council has updated their guidelines on shopfronts, and we now have this handy leaflet that they've produced, which we have distributed to businesses, and it's now available as well in our business welcome pack. So anyone who's thinking about doing business in Canterbury and is about to open up gets a welcome pack from us that now includes these shopfront guidelines, which we're absolutely delighted about. So this is a webinar session for businesses, and so we're really thrilled that a number of you have been able to join us today. Some of you have been doing business in the city for a long time, some of you are new, and we even have some who haven't opened yet. So that's brilliant. We also have a few observers from the Canterbury Society who joined us today and who were involved together with us in helping the council and consult on developing these shopfront guidelines. So this session today is really about if we think holistically, all of the advertising that all of us do, whether it's for the city as a whole or your business, whether it's online or print, or whether indeed it's your actual shopfront, we know that the higher quality all of that is, the more that we're able to attract customers and visitors into the city, the longer they'll stay, and hopefully we'll get that repeat custom as well. And so we're all in this together. Today's session, however, is focused predominantly on shopfronts, and Lizzy is going to take us through the shopfront guidelines. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can later on in the session, and if we can't answer them today, we'll go away and try and get those answers for you. We'll be able to monitor the Q&A, so if you have any questions as we go, just pop those questions into the Q&A, and Rachel and I will be monitoring that and pick those up after Lizzy's done presenting. This session, along with many of our training sessions, will be available online. I hope this won't be the first time we do it. We have a few training sessions throughout the year on council projects, activities and statutory responsibilities that we run for businesses. One of them is business rates. So we've got that one as well if you're interested, and we'll now have this shopfront one. So without further delay, Lizzy, thank you again for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Rachel. So those who don't know me, I'm Lizzy, and I'm currently the Heritage and Design Manager at Canterbury City Council. So I work in the planning department and deal with all aspects of the historic environment. But as a little extra to me, which you might, or you won't know, but I did actually used to be a retail manager before I changed career. So I worked for an independent shoe firm and I managed the shop. So I do understand all the challenges which retail has and how important to keep independent businesses thriving is, because that was very much my passion before I came on to doing this. So today I'm going to be just doing a talk about the importance of how we can embrace our city's heritage through shopfronts and through advertisements, and hopefully show you how the city centre has a direct impact on the vitality of the high street, how we can increase footfall, improve economic prosperity of a place in the long term through taking care of our heritage and through our shopfronts. And then I'll also talk you through our council guidance, which the Canterbury Society helped us produce, which I think is a very successful and worthwhile piece of information to go through. So I'll just change my slide. Okay, so I think before discussing into the details of what we might think of as good design, I'll touch on the why should we be doing this. So we know before the pandemic, high streets were really struggling with many people online shopping. And actually the UK was a country with the highest number of e-commerce sales globally. So many high street brands such as Debenhams, particularly in the case of Canterbury, have been forced to close or downsize before the pandemic, and then issues were accelerated by the pandemic. People weren't able to use the high street, and in the same way for many people it changed their future habits we see today. So although there is a variation between different places, which is key to emphasise, there is an overall reduction of footfall on our high streets currently. So with this trend, we might want to ask, why should we bother in investing in high streets? But when high streets work, they're a focus for businesses to grow, they give a sense of community, and they're a place where all walks of life can meet. And like myself, they're often an entry point to people at the start of their career, and often for people in more exercise groups. But as more of us shop online, there is less need for people to visit the high streets. We've all gone to online retailers, even if they're in our high streets, just for the pure convenience of it. But what we really need to do is make high streets places where people actually want to come and visit, where they want to spend their leisure time. So we need a quality environment with a character of a place, but it's important to make this happen. So we need a course of action to change people's perception of these places. And one of these ways, which has proven key, is to highlight the heritage of an area, give these places back their character, give places back their distinctiveness. And one key to this is through their shop fronts. When we think about images of high streets, we think about pictures of shop fronts, and they contribute so much to local character. And it's something we really need to invest more in and preserve and enhance what we already have. There's been so many different studies done about heritage being increasingly seen as a key component of the shaping of the development of places where people live, work, visit and invest. So well-designed shop fronts and advertisement have a really important role in making our town centres and high streets attractive places that people want to come and visit, which contributes to the economy and the growth and the vitality of the area. So I don't know if you've heard of it, but Historic England have their heritage action zones. So we've got a little quote at the bottom of the slide here, but basically the heritage action zones from Historic England is investing a lot of money into historic high streets to bring back that vitality and generate more civic pride in our high streets. And I have some statistics on that coming up. So this is just some couple of statistics which were taken from Historic England research recently onto bringing businesses back into our high street. So as we know, these challenges particularly are around historic towns and high streets, and we know that the sustained and successful stewardship of these buildings are intertwined with a healthy and wealthy economy. So the government and charities like Historic England and the Architectural Heritage Fund have put in a huge amount of focus onto high street investment, and actually into high street investment represents the single biggest investment that the government has done in architectural heritage or built heritage. So for example, the Future High Streets Fund is worth 1 billion, the High Street Heritage Action Zone is worth 95 million, and the Architectural Heritage Fund is worth 15 million. And all this money is going particularly into historic high streets, because historic high streets have the tools to support growth when we make the use of our existing assets. We're not asking for anything new, we're just looking at our existing assets. And we don't want each town to be a clone and look the same as everything else. We need to celebrate the individuality. The cultural heritage offer that we have is intrinsic to bringing people back into our high street. And this is what we aim to celebrate. So we need to change, there's been a change of behaviour even at the top level in retail. It's not just about the independents, which have long been seen as places which like to occupy historic buildings because of that individuality and uniqueness which it brings. But even large retailers are now occupying historic buildings because they see them as unique and characterful buildings which can help their business and make their business distinctive, even between different branches. So it's important to remember that when we're talking about this, we're not just talking about single buildings, it's about how they contribute to the collective whole of a character and a place. Because a high street needs to be more than just where people go. It needs to be where people spend time, and it needs to be about what's different about particular places and what they can offer. They need to redefine their role and function in the city centre and in villages and towns as well. And community activities can respond to these social shifts. and we see more people coming into the towns and spending time there. So the council has produced a Shopfront SPD. SPD stands for Supplementary Planning Document. There was one previously, and the 2021 was our updated version in connection with the Canterbury Society. So in basic terms, the Shopfront Guidance SPD gives guidance which is intended to help retailers, commercial operators, designers to achieve high standards of shopfront design when either altering or replacing shopfronts and associated signage. So well-designed shopfronts have a really important role in our town centres and our high streets, making them attractive places people want to visit, contributing to the growth and vitality of the economy. So our SPD encourages developers and applicants to consider matters at the earliest stage in proposals. It's about setting out general principles about for repair, reinstatement, replacement or shopfronts, but it also covers considerations including shopfront fits, the building, the street scene, guidance on doorways, window design, materials, colours, access, advertisements, lighting blinds, awnings and other measures of security. So the purpose of it is to build upon and provide more detailed advice than the local plan gives. And it is a material consideration when planning applications are being assessed. So when the planners are looking for either new shop fronts or new advertisements, they are guided by this advice. So if you follow this, then it will mean a much smoother journey through the planning process. It is also here to support the local plan. So in particular, we have policies HE9, which is on advertisements affecting heritage assets. We have HE10, which is about shop fronts, and it supports all of these. And it's definitely a document to look for, which you can find either on Canterbury City website under planning and building, or I know BID have it on their website as well. So we're talking a lot about design and what is good design. So really good architectural design in planning is about designing and devising buildings which are functional, aesthetic, durable, and take account of local distinctiveness. So in terms of taking account of local distinctiveness, one thing we've got to remember is that the whole of Canterbury City Centre and its high street is a conservation area. Some of this is also within the Canterbury World Heritage Site and its buffer zone, which is designated for its outstanding universal value by UNESCO. The city centre also contains a high number of listed and locally listed buildings, and within that there's also a lot of buildings which, while they might not be formally designated, do actively positively contribute to the character and special uniqueness of the area, and so thus do also need to be considered. So when we're looking at buildings and indications like this, we need to really consider what's important and what is special about them, and how we're either going to preserve this or enhance this. Unfortunately, shop fronts are becoming increasingly standardised and utilitarian in appearance, many outlets opting for house styles or corporate logos without any consideration about the character of the building they host or its proportions or the architectural details it holds. So both cumulatively and in isolation, non-traditional and unsympathetic shop fronts have a significant impact on the visual appearance and function and appeal of our shop fronts and our streets. The Canterbury District is really fortunate to have a legacy of really high quality shop fronts which enhance the character and appearance of our city, towns and villages. And Canterbury City Council is committed to maintaining this quality, but it is also down to individuals such as yourselves to also acknowledge and help preserve this. So these drawings are done by Clive, who I believe is on the call, so all credit to Clive. But we use the term traditional a lot when we talk about shop fronts. And I think it's a very blanket term, and it's interesting just to maybe show people who don't understand maybe the anatomy of a shop front, about all the different things which make it up. So we can, throughout Canterbury, we see so much variety in our shop fronts. Some have really elaborate carving, colourful tiling, coloured glass, and all these drawings are within the shopfront guidance, which the council has produced. So just for purposes of this webinar, the shopfront refers to the ground floor built frontages with a fascia and or display of a window. This also includes non-retail uses such as banks, building societies, cafes and restaurants. So this is a typical Georgian, later Georgian shopfront. They are quite rare and they hold a lot of historic and architectural value. You can particularly see examples of this, notably down Palace Street. There's some Regency shopfronts which are owned by the King's School, which I think at the moment largely stock their uniform, but they're really good examples of these shopfronts. So this is a more typical Victorian shopfront, which is probably the one we're most familiar with in Canterbury. So these might be contemporary with the building, but equally they might have been put in later to a even medieval building, but that doesn't mean that they don't have importance and they're not worth preserving. They're very much part of the building, part of its history, very much something we want to retain and enhance. So a value, very, very valuable addition to the older building. So if we talk about reinstatement, so the important thing to remember in terms of approaching design is we want authentic reinstatement. It's not a sort of pale pastiche of what might have been there. And I think you can see by this shopfront, which I think is 13 the parade, currently Claire's, you can see how in the first photo you've had this shopfront which conceals so much of what's beautiful about the building, overwhelms it, and doesn't seem like an attractive place where you want to be. And then you have the restored shopfront, which is much more welcoming, quirky, individual, makes a much better place for retailers. So successfully designed shopfronts, new shopfronts, will essentially look indistinguishable between what's been there all the time. So when you're walking down the high street, you don't think, oh, there's a load of new shopfronts. You just think, what a lovely high street. So it's all about authenticity. And in order to achieve this, it's really through the design process, and it can go through several iterations. So we're talking about certain things about interpretation, we're talking about joinery, profiles, and so forth. But in general, it's about studious scrutinizing of the evidence and the interpretation into design and what it intends to look like and what its purpose is. Now, a lot of these sources can be gained through historic photographs. We can lay our hands on the photographs, and sometimes that can even be done through public engagement and reaching out to people. We can appeal for photographs, and that can really bear fruit. More rarely, but if you're really lucky, you might also be able to find some historic drawings, original architect's drawings of photographs which have been lost. But it really does give some very strong evidence about how the shopfront will be. And I think in Canterbury, we're very lucky we do have a high amount of evidence before us. So as I said, here's an example of a shopfront where it's really concealed to a degree, but also removed to a degree later on. So the important thing as well to remember with shopfront detailing is it's not just there to be decorative, it's there for a purpose. It combines strength as well as elegance in its forms, and details simply struck in a way otherwise looks identical what a traditional shopfront can be. The eventual shopfront could be far weakened. So it's about making it actually structurally sound as well as just looking nice. So that's why the authentic details are really important. So sometimes usually you'll find if you get a conservation architect involved, and then they'll be able to really follow this through with you. But that's about just how, I think you can see just from that photo, about how we can really sell the uniqueness of a place and make it much more attractive by embracing our heritage and our shopfronts. This is one I just wanted to quickly go on to. just because obviously this is in the Whitefriars development. And I think actually this is quite a good example about doing a new shopfront in a modern context, because if you know the place, it's obviously in the Whitefriars development just by St Margaret Street. So visually you still have that connection between the historic shopfronts in St Margaret Street and also this modern development. And part of the reason I like this development, and particularly this shopfront, is that it draws on many of the ideas of what is a good traditional shopfront. It has good proportions, it has the idea of it being robust and giving an impression of structural stability, and it also has many of the features which we associate with historic shopfronts, such as the stall riser and the fascia. But it's a more pared down version, and it's very simple. You don't have all the ornate carvings which would look out of place here, which you might find at literally just in St Margaret Street. So it's not, I don't feel it's a pastiche. I feel it's something which takes an interpretation in quite a clean, modern way and really fits into the historic environment. So obviously advertisements play a huge part in the shopfronts, particularly if we've got a either historic shopfront or a modern shopfront which has been accurately represented. But getting the finish right is really critical. And we need this not only to secure its long-term performance, but also because it has cosmetic appeal as well. So the shopfront is a really important feature which we can use. This includes sign writing. So in our guidance, we talk about how really on the fascia you should be doing hand-painted sign writing, which is obviously the way it was traditionally done, but it's also about how it relates to the building. So very often, if you're maybe having a very large plastic internally illuminated fascia, it very often either conceals completely a lot of the delicate architectural detailing of a place, but it also detracts from it. You're not going to be noticing delicate cornicing or little details which make the place individual. You're just going to be focused on these big bright lights. And so this is part of the reason why we really resist these within the conservation area and within historic buildings. Really, it's all about respecting the building which you have, working in harmony with it, looking at what's already there, so you can really understand the unique selling point of the place and have an attractive entrance for visitors to come in. And we've definitely seen in places like Whitstable, where this photo is from. We know Whitstable went through a lot of gentrification, but now it is a place where visitors and tourists want to come. They want to spend time in. It's frequently, I always see it on Instagram of come down Whitstable, it's only X amount of time away from London, come down, have a lovely day out, because of its quirkiness, because of its uniqueness, because of its individuality. But I don't see that for Canterbury so much. But Canterbury has just as much to offer as Whitstable does. But one thing which Whitstable really embraces, as you can see from this photo, is paying respect to its traditional shop fronts and having those individual businesses as well as those larger businesses entwined. Whereas with Canterbury, we're starting to forget that. And I think that's the danger, that without realizing what's unique and what's special about our offering, we risk losing visitors, which obviously in Canterbury, being a historic town, they contribute a lot to the economy, but also just residents coming down and wanting to spend time in the city, coming down, going to a cafe, going out for dinner, and then also going to the shops. So I think we need to really look at what we're doing with our shop fronts and see how this is going to impact long-term on the vitality of our economy. So I hope that's just been a whistle-stop tour, which has been useful for you, and I'll open you up to any questions.
Lizzy, thank you. That was so helpful, and I'm just really pleased because I know you and others have been working on these for a number of years. Obviously, we had the pandemic, which delayed a few things, but it's really nice to get this the guidelines out there and to get this conversation going. And of course, in Canterbury, compared to other historic cities, perhaps, I know we're really fortunate in the number of independents we have and the overall balance as well. So we've seen over the last decade a 36% increase in independents, who now make up almost 70% of all of our businesses in the city. And we do have those two large voids on the high street because of the Stodmarsh Nature Reserve, but and that's a challenging situation for everyone. So the high street does need a bit of love, as you've mentioned, but everywhere else is looking absolutely stunning, including the Cathedral Quarter area, which is obviously very much admired, as there a big Disney film being filmed there today. So we hope to attract more of that into Canterbury in the future, and to just continue to drive that footfall. I think we're seeing, we've just hit about 3 million in terms of our footfall so far this year. So we're on track to hit about 10 million if that continues, which we think it will. And those are back to pre-pandemic levels. However, it's the mix of footfall that is, I think, part of the challenge. Our tourists are coming back, group travel trade coming back. What we also know, though, is there's been a complete shift, not only due to online, but for other reasons as well, hybrid working, etc. We're in, we continue to be in a period of transition. So whilst we're getting the footfall, we're not necessarily getting the same kind of dwell time. We're not seeing the same kind of browsing that we did before, and perhaps not the same kind of spread of footfall around the city. So that's something we are thinking a lot about. But of course, well-designed shop fronts, good wayfinding, all of that plays an important role. So I'm just going to jump over to the questions we've had, Lizzy, and also I should have mentioned at the beginning, we do have one of our local signage companies on the session today. So that's SEC Works. They're very local, just in St Dunstan's. They do a lot of work in the city. One of the first questions we had is from Steve Allen, Canterbury Tales of England and £1 Lane, about whether it's possible to provide a database of local specialists, for example, sign writers. We've had a similar questions in the past as well. Businesses saying, we're in a grade 1 or grade 2 listed building. We need to work on our windows. We need to work on some painting. We need to, whatever it is. Can you help? And Lizzy, I think it's fair to say that's not something the council could do, but perhaps something the bid could do. So yes, Steve, I think we'll take that away, and would be just really interested in finding out about more of the suppliers that some of the businesses work with already, and just to have that available for everyone. Okay, another question. If someone emails the planning department about a shop front, how much informal advice are the planning department able to give outside of the planning process? Lizzy, I'll open that up to you.
To be honest, it depends about the number of questions you have and the amount of time it might spend for an officer to go through. If you have a couple of quite concise questions, then I think it is easier to answer them over just the planning email rather than needing to go into the pre-app stage. However, when people might be talking about, I've got option A, got option B, got option C, what are we going to be doing with this? What's your opinion? And maybe there's a high level of detail. It does really need to go to the pre-app stage. I mean, part of that is because it does take up a lot of officer time. But also then you can actually get a formal response. And when we have pre-apps, we always very much look to providing information which we're going to follow through on. So if you've got the pre-app advice, that's going to give you a lot of additional information, a lot of extra advice, and you can ask any amount of questions you want to. and we'll be able to give you clear answers to that. Whereas if you're not going through the pre-app process, it's likely to be more quick and generic responses and not as individualistic as we can do during pre-app.
A similar question, Lizzie, which is probably trying to tease out what are perhaps quick factual questions that could be incorporated into the guidelines and information versus an ongoing, dialogue that would need to go through a different process. So Leanne from SEC Works is saying that their design team currently use the SDP while designing new signage for clients in the city. And then they would suggest the clients might need to liaise with the planning department, but is there a direct liaison who they could, as a sign company, speak to speed up the process? And I'm adding this next bit in, which I think from other questions we've had is perhaps more around just clarifying factual points.
Yeah, so it's really good that people are using the SPD and putting that amongst their clients, because really a lot of information which you will need and a lot of facts you will need is embedded within that. So it's definitely worth reading and really taking on board. Once you put in a planning application, you obviously have access to your planning officer. And just to be clear, all planning officers work through me as well and have correspondence with me. But you will be able to have that dialogue at that stage if it's not through pre-app. But I do think in terms of shopfronts, when you read the SPD, there will be the vast majority of answers will be within that. There will always be different individualistic cases when you're talking about listed buildings, but the general priorities which we're looking for will be included in the SPD.
Okay, thank you. If you want to clarify your question, if we haven't answered it, just go back to the Q&A and feel free to refine your question or ask something different. That's no problem. And also in the chat, Rachel's been putting in various links to resources that will be useful. A couple of things that have come into the Q&A. One is related to existing shop fronts and what the council is doing about that. And I know you can't comment on specific cases, but could you say a little bit about the process you're undertaking at the moment?
Yeah, so as probably many of you have seen in the press, we have been looking at shop fronts in terms of enforcement. Not our words, which went out in the press, which I want to make clear. But we are looking at those which have signage which was not granted consent. Particularly, we're looking at those ones which were not granted listed building consent. So with listed building consent, if you alter the character appearance or do any demolition or extension to a property, then if you don't get listed building consent from the council, then it is a criminal offence. And so we're really kind of pinning down on those ones, particularly because those are the kind of individual places which we really want to be enhancing and really celebrating. And so having the poor signage on them is something which we are concerned about. So in a similar way, but on a more local level to how Historic England have been doing their heritage action zones to really enhance the historic environment around shop fronts, this is what we're doing on our local level to try and improve the environment, to really bring in businesses, bring in visitors, and also make local residents want to come back. So that's the reasoning behind the enforcement project we've been doing, is actually it's not to clamp down on people, it's not to make people spend more money, it's really about enhancing the high street for the future, so that it can be a long-term investment.
Yeah, so there's the council has an enforcement program underway at the moment for some existing ones, and just by way of encouragement, we've seen at least, I think, 2 or 3 just within the last few months that have responded to that and changed their shop front.
It's been really successful.
Yeah, so that's ongoing. We've had another question. will bad design be tackled by council, both current and retrospective? I think we've just touched on that question, which is around there's an ongoing enforcement process as well as trying to plan for the future, which is part of what this webinar is about, and the ongoing liaison work we'll do with existing businesses and new businesses. So yeah, Carol, thank you for that question. If we can clarify any further, just pop another question into the Q&A. So another one is, Lizzy, will you be able to give this presentation to the incoming planning committee, as councillors need to be committed to these principles of the shopfront design guidelines as well, before planning applications come to them for approval?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing some events with the new councillors coming up this week, which will be just kind of quite generic about heritage within planning and our historic environment, but I can definitely raise that they should be having this also as a presentation, seeing as it is one of our key objectives at the moment within the council. So yes, I can definitely feed that back and get that done.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. And I know there's an ongoing induction program for previous and new councillors as well, with the new coalition and different people serving on different committees and cabinet portfolio as well. Right, we've then had right, so upcycling, recycling, repurposing signage, something that's really important. So Leanne from SEC Works is asking also about using solvent-free and more eco-friendly materials. Is a new planning application in favour of brand new materials for production of signage, or would you be more in favour of an eco-friendly alternative? So would those eco-friendly alternatives be supported? I'm guessing you're going to say it depends, but I'll let you comment.
Yeah, I mean, all the time with planning applications, it's all about explaining your case and why you want to do something. So if you want to use something which has more eco credentials, then tell us why and what are the benefits of this, and how it's still going to preserve the historic environment while also being eco credential. So it's definitely about communication between all of us. Obviously, we're not going to say, no, you can't reuse something. And actually, a lot of the time in the historic environment, we are all about reuse. We're about preserving the historic fabric, whether that's by sympathetic repairs, because a lot of the time, particularly with just like wood, you're going to get a lot better, more stable, more quality wood, which is historic, than you will from modern wood. So we do always in the historic environment advise repair over replacement, which I think does always lean into the sustainability aspect. But yeah, as ever, just always be really clear about your intentions to us, and we will always listen.
I think just back to Steve's question in the beginning about just building up a database of suppliers who are around the area, perhaps also building up a database of case studies. So what works well, especially as we're in such a transition, aren't we, of using new materials, really focusing on the carbon footprint as well. So we'll definitely follow up. Leanne, thank you for that question. Wojciech from Tiny Tims is asking about A boards, and I know this session isn't about A boards, but like I said in the beginning, I think we all have a role to play in terms of how we advertise and promote the city, how the public realm works, which is the responsibility predominantly of Canterbury City Council and Kent County Council, and that's certainly the case with A boards, which fall within KCC's remit. I just wanted to, Lizzy, before you comment on this, just mention that we think, certainly from our perspective, and we get lots of questions over the years about A board, that the solution to this is around wayfinding and improving wayfinding. We hope that through the Levelling Up Fund investment and probably investment beyond that, that we'll be able to really improve the wayfinding in the city. So Wojciech's question is that we can see some A boards about 5 to 6 feet high. Is there a limit to them? Is there a way to control and manage them somehow? Lizzy, I don't know if you can comment on this. If not, I can probably comment a bit on what we know.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't comment on this too much because just as a background, I'm obviously a heritage officer. I'm not a planning officer. And what you're talking about relates to advertisement consent, which, although I know a lot about, I don't think I'm the authority to talk about. But if you do have any concerns, you can definitely email them in to the planning email, which I think we shared earlier on in the presentation. But yeah, I agree. It's about kind of wayfinding, and sometimes A boards can clutter up the street unnecessarily. But yeah, it's something which I'm not in an authority position to give advice on.
So if we can find it, we'll just drop into the chat the link from Kent County Council, which is explains what businesses need to do in order to have an A board in position. We know this has been one of those topics where you know, over the years, it's a little bit like hotel checkout. You're never going to exactly solve it. You just have to keep working on new solutions. And some people really appreciate the A board. Some businesses will say that they would get no custom if it weren't for the A board because they're off for the high street. Some people feedback that there are so many and they're cluttered. So we understand all of that. And I suppose what we're trying to work on is the solution to that, the bigger solution to that. But in the meantime, we'll put those that KCC bit of information into the chat if we can find it. Right, do we have any other comments or questions from anyone? I think this has been a really good first start, and we hope to run this session every year, and we know that the council's work on this is ongoing, and we want to be in touch with businesses. I think obviously there's a role that the Business Improvement District can play in terms of building up that supplier list and case studies. And Jan Paul from the Canterbury Society has also just pointed out that they run design awards every other year, and one of the awards is for Shopfronts, and that is a really well received event locally run by the Canterbury Society. So we'll probably have some new entries for the next one. Oh, best Shopfront, Jan's clarifying yet. So hopefully we'll have some new entries for that. Right, I think those are all the questions we have. We'll do a roundup email after this with all the links we've put in the chat. And if you go away and think of something afterwards that you wish you'd asked or said, please let us know. We'd love to follow up, and we see this as an ongoing piece of work. So Lizzy, thanks again for your time. We appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining us. And Leanne, thank you from SEC Works also for being on the call, and we'll be in touch, everyone. Hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.